Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Brian Holzman, and I'm a research scientist at the Houston Education Research Consortium at Rice University. It's a pleasure to deliver this talk today, studying STEM pathways in a research practice partnership to the Physics of Living Systems Teacher Network at Harvard University. First, I'll talk about the motivation for our research project and summarize key findings from these studies. After that, I'll talk about my experiences working with a district partner on this project. In 2013, the Texas legislature passed House Bill 5, which introduced a new high school graduation framework called the Foundation High School Program. The bill aimed to increase students' college and career readiness by providing them opportunities to specialize in areas aligned with their career goals, regardless of their college plan. The Foundation High School Program went into effect starting with 9th grade students in the 2014-15 school year. Texas students are required to select an endorsement in 8th grade or early 9th grade, although students can change their endorsement later in high school. Endorsements are kind of like a high school major. House Bill 5 outlines 5 options: arts and humanities, business and industry, public services, STEM, and multidisciplinary studies. Each endorsement has multiple paths or sub-endorsements, which are course sequences students can follow to earn their endorsements. For example, there are several under STEM, including career and tech ed and computer science. It's important to note that not all endorsements and paths are offered at each high school. This project is focused on the STEM endorsement. We focus on STEM because we know there's a strong link between the rigor of a student's high school coursework and their educational attainment. But we also know the likelihood a student attends a 4-year in college increases when they take high-level courses in math and science during high school. This link between STEM coursework and college enrollment leads some to argue that STEM courses serve a gatekeeping function for higher education. Courses like physics and calculus signal academic rigor to colleges, and since math figures prominently in college admissions testing, a strong background in STEM has positive implications for students' college outcomes. Moreover, in some of our previous work, we found that among the 5 endorsements, STEM is most aligned with the admissions criteria of the state's most selective colleges and universities. Students who do not choose the STEM endorsement may face limited college prospects. Therefore, it's crucial to examine who is most likely to choose and eventually earn the endorsement. However, educational tracking, the process of separating students by academic ability, and negative stereotypes have worked to keep girls and non-Asian racial ethnic minorities from pursuing STEM courses. There may be gaps in who selects the STEM endorsement, and due to the gatekeeping power of STEM coursework, students who do not choose the STEM endorsement may face added challenges during college admissions. So first, I'm going to talk about one series of findings from this study that is on STEM deserts. This is based on the concept of food deserts, which is when low-income neighborhoods have limited access to grocery stores and healthy food. Here we study STEM deserts, areas of the school district where there are few STEM paths or subs, which are sub-endorsements, or few high school STEM courses offered. For the purposes of today, I'm going to call the District of Study Large Urban School District, or LUSD. So the research questions for this first part are: where were STEM deserts located within LUSD boundaries? And which students were more likely to live in a STEM desert? The analysis focused on LUSD 6th grade students in the 2011-12 and 2012-13 school years. These students were in 9th grade in 2014-15 and 2015-16. Those were the first 2 cohorts required to choose endorsements. So the first kind of measure we developed was called STEM path deserts. So this was based on how many unique STEM paths or sub-endorsements a student had access to within 2 miles of their residence. We define a STEM path desert as when a student only had access to 2 or fewer paths within their immediate vicinity. So this map shows the distribution of STEM path deserts in LUSD. So neighborhoods or census tracts that have darker shades of blue means that a higher proportion of students in that neighborhood were considered to live in a STEM path desert. So you see here in this district, there were more students in STEM path deserts in the southern and eastern parts of the district, and very few students in STEM path deserts in the western part of the district. Another definition was based on the number of unique STEM courses a student had access to in their high schools nearby. So we define this as whether a student had access to 61 or fewer unique courses. And here you see similar patterns, that the STEM deserts tend to be clustered in the southern and eastern parts of the district. This map shows neighborhood socioeconomic status by neighborhood in district boundaries. So this measure of neighborhood socioeconomic status was based on census information on education, income, and occupation. And what you see is that the lower SES neighborhoods, which are in darker shades of blue, are clustered in the eastern and southern parts of the district. So comparing this map to the previous 2 maps, there appears to be some sort of correlation between neighborhood socioeconomic status and living in a STEM path or course desert. In fact, we found that students in low SES neighborhoods had a 32% likelihood of living in a STEM path desert. In contrast, students in high SES neighborhoods had a 21% chance of living in a STEM path desert. The second series of findings I'm going to talk about is on gender and STEM endorsement change over time. So first, it's important to get some familiarity with the policy change that happened in the district. Students develop what's called a personal graduation plan in 8th or early 9th grade, which lists their endorsement and maps out the courses they will take in high school to earn their endorsement. In the 2018-19 school year, LUSD started requiring all 12th grade students to meet with their guidance counselors to revisit their personal graduation plans. The prior cohort of students did not experience this counseling change. The policy was implemented because the district was concerned students were confused about the endorsement system. In this new counseling meeting, students and counselors discussed the progress students made toward their endorsements and if students wanted to make changes or addition to their graduation plan. For example, students could switch endorsements or add another endorsement if they already completed most of that endorsement's requirements. We refer to this meeting as the PGP check-in. Previous research suggests that counselors play a pivotal role in reducing STEM gaps and encouraging college preparation. This means it is crucial to understand who is choosing and eventually earning the STEM endorsement, especially considering this policy change. So we have 2 research questions in this study. Did gender predict STEM endorsement choice among 9th grade students? How might a district-wide counseling effort, the PGP check-in, have affected gender gaps in STEM endorsement completion? For this second research question, we examined students' initial and final endorsement choices. In effect, we're looking at whether students stuck with the STEM endorsement, added or switched to it between grades 9 and 12. We compared change over time for cohort 2 students who experienced the PGP check-in to cohort 1 student who did not, and examined whether the PGP check-in affected females more or less than males. This graph shows STEM endorsement choice by grade divided by cohort. First, we found differences by student cohort and gender in patterns of STEM endorsement choice over time. The dotted lines show the share of students from cohort 1 who chose the STEM endorsement in grades 9 and 12, with males in blue and females in red. The solid lines trace trends in STEM endorsement choice for male and female students in cohort 2. As you can see, the gender gap in STEM endorsement choice was consistent over time for students in cohort 1. In both 9th and 12th grades, male students were about 6 percentage points more likely to choose the STEM endorsement than female students. However, this pattern changed for cohort 2 students. The increase in STEM endorsement choice for females in cohort 2 was so large and nearly closed the gender gap by high school graduation. In fact, the gap between male and female students in cohort 2 was less than 1 percentage point in 12th grade. We think it is possible these differences between cohorts 1 and 2 were related to the PGP check-in because the second cohort experienced a counseling change during the 12th grade, while the first cohort did not. The first 2 bars of this graph show whether the PGP check-in helped non-STEM students in 9th grade add or switch to STEM by 12th grade. It appears it did so by 9 to 11 percentage points, but it did so similarly for male and female students. The second 2 bars on the graph show whether the PGP check-in helps STEM students in 9th grade stick with STEM and not drop it by 12th grade. It appears it did so by 9 points for males and a whopping 27 points for females. I should note that these figures come from statistical analyses that account for student background characteristics such as demographic and socioeconomic background, as well as academic performance. In results not shown, we also found the disproportionately positive association of the PGP check-in among STEM females in 9th grade was largest in magnitude among female students from economically disadvantaged backgrounds and low socioeconomic status neighborhoods. We found that students who lived in low SES neighborhoods were more likely to live in a STEM path or course desert. So it may be important to expand access to STEM paths and courses to ensure that low SES students have equitable opportunities to study STEM. Second, female students were less likely to choose the STEM endorsement upon high school entry, but the PGP check-in might have helped close that gap by graduation. Counseling may be a potential solution to the gender gap in STEM endorsement choice and completion. Improving counseling efforts among middle and high school students may help reduce the sizable gender gap in initial STEM endorsement choice, as well as encourage female student retention in STEM. Next, I'm going to talk about my experiences partnering with a school district around this project. So this project began in summer 2018. PERC was approached by OpenStax, which is an educational technology initiative at Rice University, to collaborate on a project on STEM learning. OpenStax produces peer-reviewed, openly licensed digital textbooks, so a big component of that study focused on that. OpenStax wrote a National Science Foundation grant, which was funded in fall 2019. There were 4 initial goals of that project: to examine STEM outcomes in high school, to examine how STEM outcomes in high school predict STEM outcomes in college, to examine how taking a college course that used digital textbooks affected STEM outcomes, and to examine what features of digital textbooks were most important to STEM outcomes. Research questions 2 through 4 required us to collaborate with local colleges and universities, specifically open enrollment colleges that admitted most of their applicants. The idea was that we could be able to track a sizable share of LUSD students into these colleges and could use high school outcomes to predict college outcomes. HERC had never worked with a college on a research project. Fortunately, HERC's director had connections throughout the Houston community and was able to reach out to high-level administrators who could connect us to relevant parties. In December of 2019, we started reaching out to 2 colleges. We reached out to an open enrollment 4-year college. However, after initial discussions, it became clear they could not participate. There were communication challenges, and there was mild interest on the college's part at best. we also reached out to the community college system. We had several discussions and they expressed interest. We drafted an initial research proposal, which they provided guidance on and helped us revise. Collaborating with the community college was ideal because about 25% of LUSD high school graduates continued on to this community college system. HERC is a research practice partnership between Rice University and Houston area school districts. The mission is to improve the connection between education research and decision-making for the purpose of equalizing outcomes by race, ethnicity, economic status, and other factors associated with inequitable educational opportunities. HERC maintains memoranda of understanding with our district partners that outline the parameters of the partnership, such as the data sharing agreement and how research findings must be shared with stakeholders. Research projects must be mutually beneficial to both the researcher and the practitioner. For example, a district partner can say no to a potential study if they feel it doesn't address a pressing need or wouldn't change policy or practice. On the other hand, HERC can say no to a potential study if we feel we don't have the organizational capacity or staffing expertise. LUSD is one of HERC's 12 partners, and projects can get proposed in two ways. LUSD approaches HERC about a potential study they're interested in, or we approach LUSD about a potential study we're interested in. In this case, HERC was awarded an NSF grant to study STEM, and we had to pitch a study on STEM to LUSD. We had to develop research questions that would address a pressing need and could change policy practice. In December 2019, there was some initial brainstorming at HERC, which led to our discovery of the new high school graduation requirements, including the STEM endorsement. We drafted conceptual frameworks for potential research questions. On the right, you'll see an example of one of those conceptual frameworks. And then we began initial communication with LUSD. Before a project proposal is drafted, we often send feelers to our district partners. We actually have a research manager at LUSD. HERC pays for their salary. And this research manager serves as our liaison to district departments and administrators. The liaison helps us collaborate with LUSD on research projects, including identifying whether and which departments and administrators are interested and would make effective research partners. For this project, we sent the liaison drafts of our research questions and conceptual frameworks, which she then used to pitch the project to the district. For this project, we partnered with 4 departments in the district: counseling and compliance, secondary curriculum, school choice, and research and accountability. Research and accountability is always our partner. That's our primary partner listed in LUSD in our memorandum of understanding. Since many people listening to this are educators, I want to note HERC's collaboration with LUSD and other districts tends to happen at district department or higher levels. If you're interested in collaborating with researchers in your district, I would suggest talking to principals or department leaders about the questions or topics you want to raise. So in February 2020, we held a project proposal meeting with district departments to discuss a potential study, gather information, and address questions. During the meeting, we proposed our endorsement idea, but also let the district provide opportunities for input. Perhaps the endorsement idea was not in line with their interests or goals, and they had other ideas. They liked the endorsement idea, but were also interested in the geography of STEM opportunity throughout the district, which is how the STEM endorsement piece came to be. This was not originally part of our study plan. Following the meeting, we began drafting a project proposal and circulated it to the district for review and signature. Before we sent it to the district, we actually have an internal review process at HERC to ensure that project proposals and the research questions are well articulated and the benefits to the district are well described. We then send project proposals to the district for external review, and they can provide suggestions or ask us for additional clarifications. Once they are satisfied, they will sign the proposal. So our project proposal was signed in June 2020. After this proposal was signed, that's when we were able to begin research. We could request additional data, start cleaning and analyzing data. But the pandemic changed a lot of things for our research project. So these are our original goals. The pandemic did not affect the LUSD component of the study that much, so I'm referring to the first bullet here. We decided to drop the high school graduating class of 2019-20 from our study, in part because their college going might be affected by the economic recession. We also experienced extended delays getting data and answers to questions from district leaders because they had other priorities like transitioning to virtual instruction. The pandemic did, however, affect the college component of the study. We met with the community college right before everything locked down, but experienced severe communication challenges after that. Last summer, after we heard from them, we drafted a memorandum of understanding and sent it to them for feedback. We followed up a number of times, but after a while, it became clear they didn't have the capacity to collaborate on an external project right now. We confirmed that during a Zoom meeting last month. The pandemic was simply not a good time to start a new collaboration with the community college system. Because of that, HERC's role is solely focused on LUSD. Given the challenges of the pandemic, we believe this change to the goals outlined in the original grant will be understood by the grant funder. As I mentioned earlier, we had to pitch our project idea to LUSD and get them on board. This requires buy-in from the district partner. Based on personal experience, if there's not buy-in, genuine interest, commitment, and trust, the project will fail. This is why we worked hard to tailor our study of STEM to endorsements, a relatively recent state policy the district might be interested in, but we're also open to their input, such as when they suggested questions on STEM deserts. Getting buy-in is really hard work and requires great communication skills, but it pays off, namely with the continuous communication a trusting relationship brings. Even if there may be delays, we can get additional data from the district, answers to data-related questions, and get information that contextualize the study, like details on policies or practices. I want to add that HERC's previous relationship with LUSD on prior projects helped get us buy-in. HERC has partnered with the School of Choice Department in the past. They were familiar with our research. They trusted us. These previous relationships stand in contrast to the relationship building we had to do with the colleges that I mentioned earlier. In those cases, we had no relationship with staff at either college. So we had the double duty of trying to start building a new relationship while also introducing a study they weren't particularly interested in. So I want to provide an example of how continuous communication helps research and can change it in a research practice partnership. So last summer, as I was looking at some of the data, I noticed strange patterns while cleaning and analyzing the STEM endorsement data files. I saw that there was a large increase in cohort 2 between grades 11 and 12, particularly among females. The pattern seemed too large to be a normal annual fluctuation, and I eventually hypothesized that something must have happened on the ground. I prepared tables, graphs, and slides, then sent them to our liaison at the district, who then asked the district staff for more information. Eventually, they convened a short meeting with district partners to discuss the patterns. I was worried about what I learned or not learn, whether I'd have to rethink using the data and design, whether I would trust the data in the end. Instead, the head of counseling provided us context on what the PGP check-in was, who experienced it, and why they initiated it to address confusion about the endorsement system. The meeting provided me some relief, and it helped us change our research questions design and analysis to focus on a policy change that the district made and its potential influences on gender equity. I think this is the result of the genuine interest, commitment, and trust, the buy-in we got from the district. I don't think we would have learned about this issue so easily without our research practice partnership with LUSD. So I want to talk about some of our next steps. We will update the analysis when we get new data. We're still waiting on some updated files, one of which it will allow us to integrate a variable measuring STEM program and magnet participation because that's of interest to the Department of School Choice. Part of our memorandum of understanding is that we have a no surprises policy with the district. We do not share results without giving the district first a heads up. I want to clarify, no surprises doesn't mean we hide findings. We just let them know first before writing up and publishing results for the general public. So this often happens through meetings with the district. So next month, the district will be hosting a cross-functional meeting. These types of meetings convene stakeholders from multiple departments, not just those that we are direct partners on for this proposal. At this meeting, I will discuss high-level findings. It'll also be a place in which departments who don't often meet together can talk to one another and can come up with solutions to jointly address the research findings through policy or practice. It's important to note the district pushed for this meeting to happen in June so they can make any changes during the summer if necessary. We'll also continue writing our research briefs and then submit them for internal review at HERC and then external review at the district. Research briefs are meant for a practitioner-based audience. Dense academic technical language is avoided. I tend to write them with lots of visuals and kind of think about an 8th grade audience in mind. Aside from detailing the findings, research briefs include an implications section. I've learned to write this with the district in mind. Not only do I provide recommendations that I thought up, but also recommendations the district discussed during the cross-functional meeting. Incorporating their voice increases the likelihood that the topics will be addressed. Aside from these briefs, we kind of produce skimmed down versions of the findings in one-pager documents that summarize the findings at a high level. Since there are 4 components of the study, 2 of which I discussed today, we'll also provide a whole project one-pager that'll summarize some findings from each of the 4 briefs. We'll also write journal articles for peer-reviewed publications. We'll also probably attend a conference this fall. HERC has a communication director who is in regular contact with Rice's Office of Public Affairs. They typically will give that office a heads up before a research brief comes out. Sometimes that office will produce a press release, which might get picked up by the press. So sometimes there are opportunities for us to talk to journalists about our research. Another thing that happens after a research project is that we'll keep our ears to the ground of any changes to policy or practice that the district made in response to the research findings. So that's a brief overview of the history of this project. As you can see, buy-in is key. You have to earn it to make the project happen and to enable effective communication. Good communication is critical throughout the course of a project, and it can change the nature of the research in positive ways. I wouldn't have been able to share anything on gender gaps in STEM and the role of guidance counseling if we hadn't fostered buy-in and developed good communication with the district. Moreover, researchers must be flexible and nimble. For example, we tried to accommodate the district's interest in our research study and added a component on STEM deserts. We also responded to new information on the PGP check-in after we had questions about patterns in the data, and we reworked our research design. Most importantly, we had to adjust to the tumult of the global pandemic. Just want to say thank you. It was a pleasure to share some findings from our research as well as our experiences doing the study with you all today. And here's my contact information if you have questions, and I look forward to communicating with all of you next week during our Q&A session. Thank you.
Okay, well, in the interest of time, and also to keep this discussion to 1 hour, I suggest we start. It is my great pleasure to introduce Brian Holtzman. Here, Brian, thank you for joining us. Brian is a research scientist at the Houston Education Research Consortium at Rice University, where he studies and evaluates interventions and practices in Houston area school districts. And you saw in his talk one of these studies. And before joining Rice, Brian earned his PhD in sociology of education and higher education administration at Stanford University. Brian, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for a talk that really triggered so many thoughts in my mind, and that sort of reinforced this. I don't want to start with a grim picture, but really sort of the hopelessness of how difficult it is to change education, because there are so many things that hold each other in place. At the same time, I think your talk also shows that there are some ray of lights, because individuals can actually have quite a bit of impact. So as I went through your talk, so first of all, to the audience, I mean, feel free to use the chat, but if you have any questions that you would like to ask Brian, just raise your hand. I'll start with some questions, and then hopefully we can transition to questions from the audience. So if you have questions that were not answered in the video, or if a new question has come up in your mind, then please raise your hand. Otherwise, you'll be hearing me asking questions all the time. So, Brian, the first thing that struck me is that this approach that you described from Texas is very different from that in my own state, and that sort of shows the weakness of a completely deregulated education system. But the intervention that you describe, where there's this check-in for the personal graduation plan at the schools in Texas, I was thinking, as I was looking at both your data and listening to your description, I thought, 12th grade? Isn't that way too late if students make the plan in 8th or 9th grade, and then you wait until, I mean, the good thing is that it seems that the check-in is having an impact, but shouldn't you have check-ins maybe every year or even more frequently, rather than waiting all the way till the last grade?
First of all, I just want to say it's a pleasure to talk to the PoLS-T network today, and glad that everyone saw my talk. In terms of the check-in in 12th grade, yes, it is probably too late to get students to start studying STEM. The goals of the counselors was more to make sure that they were on track to complete STEM if that was what they had chosen, but also to get the students to add STEM if by chance they had completed enough coursework to complete the STEM endorsement. They did this for the second cohort and not the first, and I think that is a sign that they were just kind of taken aback by this policy, maybe. There just wasn't a whole lot of,
you mean by this policy, you mean the statewide policy of having these endorsements?
Yeah, I think, it was something that they decided to do as they were kind of learning about how students were progressing through the endorsements. From conversations and even from a qualitative report that we read, done by another research group, there just wasn't a whole lot of guidance from the state education agency to districts and teachers and counselors about this policy. So I think that counselors, teachers, other people at districts were just as confused about the policy as students and parents. And so, yes, it was this check-in may be considered late, but I think they just did this as they were kind of learning more about the policy.
So maybe a very obvious thing to implement is more regular check-ins and to sort of guide people along the way rather than at the very last minute. I was also struck by the gender gap data that you showed, and I posted a question. I posted it this morning. You might not have seen it. Where, I mean, let's see if I still have that on the screen, so I can very briefly. Oh no, I don't. I have Perusal open, but I don't have the right part of your talk in front of me. But maybe I can quickly find it. You had a graph that showed the gender gap for cohort 1 and cohort 2. Yeah, here it is. I have the data. So why don't I quickly put it on the screen here? Let me see if I can share it. Yeah. So this was the graph you showed here. I don't know if you can see it. There. Is it visible? Yeah, okay. So what struck me is, well, first of all, this is phenomenal, right? That that you managed with that one intervention to close the gender gap. But the other thing that is surprising is the jump for the males between cohort 1 here and cohort 2. Any idea what's going on there? Why were the cohort 2 males so much more inclined to have a STEM endorsement? Pardon my dog there.
No, I really don't have an explanation for that. You would think that if there was a jump in STEM choice in the second cohort, it would be similar for males and females, but females look unmoved by any sort of change upon high school entry. This is also in spite of the fact that the district had been collaborating with some nonprofits, one of which did focus on females, Girls Who Code. So that's something that I do not have an answer for. We do have a meeting with the district in about 2 weeks, and maybe that can shed some light, but yeah, I do not have an answer for that.
I muted myself here. I guess that part of the way of improving your data, of course, to include more school districts. Are you planning on doing that, or is it really difficult? You mentioned the importance of getting buy-in, and I can imagine that a lot of school districts are looking, kind of with, we're a little bit wary of university involvement in what they're doing. And that was actually a question I had. You mentioned the importance of buy-in from the school district. And I guess you need buy-in from teachers and guidance counselors too, right? So how do you work at this problem from all different sides?
So we do not have plans to do the study in other school districts.
You do or do not?
Do not. So HERC partners with a number up to 11 or 12 Houston area school districts. This was done with one of them. With this particular, we have access to a lot of data. With the other districts, we do not have access to as much data. And I think one key variable that we have access to with this school district, LUSD, is grades. And so with the other school districts, we do not have access to grades. And grades actually are more important in a lot of some of the other components of the study, which I did not present in that talk. So that would be a key missing variable that we would not have access to if we did partner with other districts. And also this was a project that was of interest to this particular district. So sometimes we do projects with all the districts together. I do not work on that side of HERC, but then sometimes we do partnerships with individual districts of the 12. And then the other question was on buy-in. So we typically work with higher level administrators, oftentimes assistant superintendents of departments in the district. And then sometimes they'll bring in other district staff that are immediately below them, like research managers or compliance officers. We do not typically work with school staff on projects. We typically work at the district level. For one of my projects, I actually have interacted with two principals. It's because that study is looking at the effects of attending two particular schools that served particular students. So I have interacted with principals and I met with them, but most of the times we're partnering with people at administrative levels.
Good. Well, I want to be sure that I give people in the audience an opportunity to ask questions. In case you've forgotten how to raise your hand, there's a reactions button there at the bottom. Click that and then hit the raise hand button. Otherwise, I'm happy to continue here. In fact, reading your bio, Brian, I had another question that was triggered. Elmarie, let me quickly ask that question, and then I'll pass it on to you. You were just in your bio. You describe a text messaging experiment that you carry out with middle school teachers to improve communication. If I recall correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, because it's been a while since I read your bio, but to improve communication with parents and teachers, I think. I just read, I think it was yesterday, it was either the New York Times or the Washington Post, I don't remember, an article which was a large-scale research experiment to use text messaging to improve vaccine uptake, so to stimulate people to get vaccinated. And they found something, maybe in retrospect it's not that surprising, but I would never have been able to predict it, that if the text sent to people included the term, a vaccine is reserved for you, that it increased the likelihood of people actually going and getting a vaccine significantly. And I was thinking, prompted by what I read in your bio, that maybe it was, texting, and rather than sort of talking to people like, your mother is talking to you, you got to do this or whatever, to tell them something about, a spot in college being reserved or whatever, you might actually be able to accomplish quite a bit. So I would love to hear more about your text messaging experiment.
So that's a middle school text messaging project. The goal is to text parents of middle school students about how to communicate with their child about academic and socio-emotional issues. And it's an experiment. It's not part of my work at HERC, it's a side project. And so we've randomized parents to receive text messages that kind of talk about those issues, and then the parents that are assigned to the control group receive kind of reminders about dates, or this is a great time of year to go to national park, things that are just not related to academic or socio-emotional learning. We're still analyzing the data, so we do not have results yet, but there has been a move in the past decade in education research to look at nudges and other like text messaging interventions. There have been nudge interventions to look at the issue of summer melt, which is when students plan to go to college they were admitted to college, and then something happens over the summer that prevents them from going to college, whether they discover a gap between their financial aid award and what they can afford, or if You know, some students, particularly those from low income backgrounds, just have trouble getting physically to campus, or maybe they just don't complete health and housing forms. So there's some researchers who are at University of Virginia and University of Pittsburgh that have done some text messaging interventions to remind students of key deadlines and dates, or even interact with like a guidance counselor that can help address some of these challenges they're facing over the summer. Those interventions seem pretty promising, but on the other hand, some people have done nudge interventions like that without promising results. So I think there's just a lot of things that researchers still don't know about how text messaging or other kinds of nudges affect students. One professor pointed out to me, as more of these things become common, maybe people just become inundated by text messages and other kinds of reminders. And so maybe at that point, it just becomes more crucial in how they are structured, or even the language that we are using in sending people these reminders.
Well, I just found the article. It was in the Washington Post, and it was not just a few days ago. It was about a week ago. I guess time is warped in my mind, but you may find it interesting, and maybe there's some lesson to be learned here that can be translated to education. I mean, there are some parallel in terms of resistance to education and socioeconomic status and STEM deserts and resistance to vaccination. So I thought, wow, this is a possibly interesting connection. Elmarie, thank you for patiently waiting there. Let me turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Eric. Brian, I enjoyed your talk because I've been trying to play around a little bit with data as well. And the first thing that I realized, it's extremely difficult to get hold of data on a county level, on a state level, and then I don't even want to think about a national level. Sort of two questions. The first is just, I assume your data focused on public schools. There were no private school data, which I sometimes think it's easier if one has a relationship with private schools. They probably have a more of an incentive to share data because they try and understand what's going on. Just as a background, I teach at a private school in Florida. But the one thing that, while playing around with the data, the one thing that we noticed was there seems to be a difference nowadays between AP classes, being AP Science specifically, between private schools and public schools, where the number of students that are taking APs in the public schools are increasing, and then the number of students taking AP Science in the private schools are decreasing. So I guess my question is sort of, is there any indication that there is almost a correlation between APs taking and the students being interested in science? And is this messaging of APs as important for science or later on in science, is that not what holds a lot of students keeps them out of science?
I think that there is some research that shows that taking AP courses is beneficial for college enrollment and graduation. There are a couple of reasons why. Maybe you're better prepared for the rigors of the coursework in college. Another potential reason is that it helps reduce your time to degree. And so you can get those courses, those AP courses transferred as college credit, and maybe it doesn't take you as long to complete your college major. That is also important, and particularly for low-income students. If they can reduce their time to degree, that means they pay less for college tuition. And so there's a lot of reasons why taking AP courses is beneficial. I don't see a reason at this point to worry whether AP courses will, the importance of them will decrease or even reduce the likelihood of college graduation. But that's just kind of what the more recent research has said, that AP courses, IB courses, other kinds of advanced courses like dual credit that they seem to have some benefit, some positive association, and sometimes a causal association with college outcomes.
Great.
Okay,
Do you
can
have
I-
a follow-up question,
Can I just
Anne-Marie?
follow up
Yes.
with this? So a thing that concerns me a little bit about the AP is, and I see it at our school, is they keep pushing these AP courses to younger and younger students. Sort of ninth grade, oh, you need to take these and these and these APs. And I'm wondering about the emotional readiness of students tackling those courses at such a young age. And then also if that does not make them give up and say, oh, I've tried AP human geography. I failed the course. Clearly, I'm not a science person.
Yeah, I can't speak to that. I'm not a developmental psychologist. I think that's a better question for someone with a psychological background to see, is it harmful or helpful to have young children take advanced courses? But I really am not familiar with the research on that area.
So, Rob, I see you have your hand up there. Thank you for that question, Anne-Marie, and thank you, Brian, for your answers. So, Rob, you're next.
Awesome. So it's actually funny you brought up the AP because I was thinking about that too. I'm about wrapped up with a study with that that was showing that a lot of students were taking like AP Physics 1, not moving on to 2 or to Physics C, and that there was a huge difference on student success based on their gender and their ethnicity. And I looked at the national set of data from College Board for those AP courses. And that's an idea that I had too, was maybe people aren't moving on because they're having, these self-efficacy and self-interest and identity issues. But one thing that I thought of when I was watching your talk with the STEM deserts, and I do a lot with the SES and the locale and the crossover and interactions with those two, is within these STEM deserts and the courses offered and the success of students and stuff like that. And I'm trying to recall the map. It seemed like everything was sort of congested again to those kind of higher density areas. And I was wondering your thoughts on kind of the interplay of those high density areas, the ability to afford these continuous STEM programs where they have access to multiple things, if that may help with the buy-in of these schools, and I guess help to water the programs, if we want to call it that, to stick with the idea of a desert. Just kind of your thoughts on that.
So in this district, we saw that students in socioeconomic status neighborhoods were more likely to be classified as living in a STEM desert, either by the paths or the course's definition. And so poverty, education, income, and STEM deserts go hand in hand. Also race, that neighborhoods with more African-American students had more students classified as living in a STEM desert. From an equity point of view, we want all students to have opportunity to study STEM at the same level. And so I think that increasing the number of STEM options in African-American communities, as well as communities with high poverty rates, I think is a goal we should pursue. And that could, I don't know, maybe create a STEM culture in the school, kind of like how higher education researchers college going culture. Maybe there could be a STEM culture in the school, and that could help improve climate, aspirations, even performance around STEM.
Now, to jump off that, it, you know, I with a lot of these schools, especially lower SES schools, I found that they, you know, either they don't have the teachers to be able to teach these courses or the certification. And I think Texas recently had some changes with their definitions for either science certs or physics certs. So let's say we have some of these places, because I completely agree with expanding the availability of these courses and different levels of courses, right? So that students maybe with mathematics can get in at a, I don't want to say a lower level, but maybe a less mathematically rigorous course. Do you have any thoughts or ideas on ways we can go about that for these, you know, schools that just can't afford it? I mean, if they can't afford it, I've been trying to wrap my head around what we could do, something actionable we could do that can start to kind of water this growth and get kids to enroll that will require teachers, and then having more teachers that will allow for more courses, and, you know, from there.
Yeah, that's a tricky question, because obviously if you have more STEM offerings or more rigorous STEM offerings, then you have to have more teachers or more highly qualified teachers. So, and that's a costly endeavor. In the meantime, I think that trying to cultivate a STEM culture around the courses that are already offered, and so that you can demonstrate there's a high demand for this, and that could, then you can go back to the district and say there's a high demand, we should be hiring more teachers, expanding the course offerings. That could be one way. You could also partner with nonprofits potentially to offer extracurricular opportunities. You could also partner with colleges and universities for dual credit partnerships. So students that, you know, do you know, kind of max out on what they can take at their high school could take you know, calc at a local community college. But yeah, it's a costly endeavor, and I think teachers are probably the biggest investment.
Awesome, thank you. You know, Rob's question and one of the things you said, Brian, triggered another thought, and we sort of touched upon that in some of our previous interactions within the PoLS network, because we have people not just from the US but from Europe and you know, Canada, and even some people from Latin America sometimes participate. And I think one of the things that sets the US secondary education apart from that in many other countries is that STEM fields are optional, or almost optional, almost completely optional, all of them. Even though we live in a world that's sort of dominated by technology, which is a product of STEM, and having a STEM literate society, I think, is crucially important for the well-being of society. But yet there seems to be a reluctance in the US to really treat STEM the same way as learning English. Let's just to mention something is, and if anything, the data that you share in your talk show, you know, how important STEM is as a basis for future success. So I wonder what people's thoughts are on trying to convince politicians at the state level or districts to push much harder on STEM, given the obvious benefits of it. I mean, your data shows it. I know this is a difficult subject here in the US, but we need to do all we can.
So there's two other parts of the study that I didn't talk about. One's just looking at who was choosing the STEM endorsement upon high school entry. The other part is kind of looking at how endorsements feed into college enrollment. And what we're seeing there preliminarily is that the high achieving students are selecting into the STEM endorsement. Students with higher GPAs, higher test scores, that's the endorsement that they are choosing. If you did just compare STEM endorsements versus other endorsements and look at what kinds of colleges they go to, whether they're going to a 2-year college, a 4-year selective, 4-year less selective, or just no college at all. Students choosing the STEM endorsement are most likely to go to the selective 4-year college. But when you account for other background characteristics, there's really no differences among the endorsements. So what is happening is that the STEM endorsement is kind of serving as the selective college track. So this endorsement system is formalizing or even making tracking specific in the state of Texas, or that's what we're seeing so far. So high achieving students are somehow getting the message from district leaders, from parents. I don't know. Our data cannot shed light on where these messages are coming from, but high achieving students are selecting into the STEM endorsement and going to college. So it's not necessarily endorsement that is, there's no like net benefit value added from like any one endorsement when you account for background characteristics, but it's just that high achieving students choose the STEM endorsement, and then that's what's propelling them to go into college. And so when I think of that, it's like this policy wasn't designed to create a tracking system. It was designed, for better, I have my own opinions on the policy, but the people that wrote this policy, their intention was to provide students who did not want to go to college with post-high school options. And so basically to broaden opportunities. Instead, it's kind of constraining opportunities to specific kinds of colleges. So like creating this like feeder system. And so in my view, I don't think that any one endorsement should lead to a specific kind of college. And so maybe that means if we're going to keep this endorsement system, making some of the requirements the same, that all of them should require 4 years of math and science, because that's what colleges, at least the selective colleges in Texas, are requiring. So that's kind of my opinion of thinking about maybe making the requirements, some of the ones that are most associated with college admission, the same across endorsements, because otherwise you're setting it up for different college destinations by endorsement choice.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I don't know if you saw the comment from Helen Reynolds in the chat, who she's from the UK, and they're just like in, I think, probably most of the rest of the world. STEM education is compulsory up to age 16. So I think maybe I'm biased, but it seems to me that that's an obvious route to go. I don't know. I'm not too familiar. This idea, this whole system of endorsement, is that limited to Texas, or are there other states who have a similar system of endorsements? Is there anybody else in the audience who can shed light on what happens in other states, or what should be happening across states?
I believe New York is about to start something similar, or has started something similar, where it's based on number of credits in kind of each subject that you take. So if you go like I think they call it pathways instead of endorsements. So if you take like the STEM pathway, you have to do, I think, a technology, and then a certain amount of sciences, and then a certain amount of math. And is it okay if I ask a question? Because I have something from that piqued my interest. One thing that I'm interested in that as well. So these students are choosing this path upon entering 9th grade, upon entering the high school?
At the end, during 8th grade, or at the beginning of 9th, if they did not attend, a public school or a school in the district.
Gotcha. Because one thing that I always wonder with this, right? So I teach AP physics, and I always tend to have the strongest kids, and they always do really well. And I always wonder, I'd love to say it's my teaching ability, but I always wonder, is it just their, you know, I don't want to say their natural tendencies, but maybe their earlier exposures to science or mathematics, or the kind of that science capital that comes with them. And I'm curious if you or your group or some of the people that maybe you interact with have looked at that aspect, whether these students have this capital much earlier on and they just tend towards the STEM endorsements, and that's, you know, they also tend towards college earlier, because a lot of research I've read has sort of shown the duality of that. You know, is it the chicken before the egg, or kind of the egg before the chicken?
Yeah, our design cannot really tell us chicken before the egg before the chicken. That's just not how we've set up our analysis. We do integrate characteristics from middle and high school. And so you see that students that take, for example, Algebra 1 in middle school, more likely to choose the STEM endorsement, more likely to complete it by high school graduation. I think they're even more likely to go to college. And so we do see some of that. There is this pathway from at least from middle school through the end of high school. But yeah, I'm sure other people in the future could do additional work to dig back even to early elementary school.
Donna Jones has an interesting comment. I was typing my reply, but I think I'm just going to say it rather than finish my typing here. You know, about a more grassroots approach and encouraging students in middle school that they are scientists, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, everybody's born a scientist, and you know, is curious about how the world works, and it's sort of a shame that we can't keep that flame, that curiosity alive. And I think there are probably many reasons for that. One of them we touched a little bit on is the assessment. Part of it is AP, and I was looking again at Kelly Warble's talk this morning, and continuing some of the discussions that were going on online there about the importance of traditional grading and high stakes grading, how it just turns off people because they stumble on failure. So there's so much that needs to be changed about our approach to education that it's hard to know where to start. We really need to push at it from all different sides. Since I mentioned Donna, she had actually a question in perusal that I don't think was addressed, that I'm actually kind of curious about too. She wrote, it will be interesting to compare student entering STEM majors before COVID and after. You know, what impact, for example, did virtual learning have on the number of students choosing STEM majors? And I just finished my own personal reflection on remote teaching. And even though I think remote teaching was widely panned, I can now state with pretty much confidence that in my class, which is definitely not a typical class, I know, but I'm teaching physics to students who don't want to learn physics. They're mostly pre-meds who have to learn physics, and engineers who have to learn physics as a requirement. That I've probably done my best teaching ever last year. I've seen increases in self-efficacy, increases in content mastery, increases in feeling of relatedness and autonomy that I've never seen before. So do you have any, I know it's kind of early to ask that question, but have you seen any impact of COVID on the number of students choosing STEM majors in Texas? Did remote teaching have any effect, positive or negative?
I'm not aware of that. This study, we're not looking, we don't have access to college majors in our data. And so, yeah, all we can see is whether a student goes to college or not. You know, we were going to partner with community college to look at things like major, but that fell apart. So yeah, we unfortunately cannot look at that. We're also not looking at the COVID year, just because I think that would add some additional complexity to looking at high school grades, because in this district, they actually gave some leeway on how students would be graded in the last few months of 2020, of the 2019-20 school year. So we're not looking at the COVID. This is a pre-COVID study. And so we're not able to tease that out. But yeah, I think that maybe some students did not excel with virtual learning. Some students did. You know, it might also vary by the type of college. At community colleges, a lot of people, probably most people, are working part-time. And so maybe the virtual environment is actually more conducive to their schedule and their learning. So I think there's a lot of variation and contextual variation in how virtual learning may affect a variety of educational outcomes.
Yeah, and I know that in your study you sort of eliminated the COVID year, but still you have access to the data and sort of, I know you haven't looked at this in detail, but what was the impact on high school STEM teaching of this pandemic, remote teaching? Is that anything you can comment on? Anything you've, even though it might not be, completely analyzed yet, that?
Yeah, I don't know if we have the data, and I don't know how we go about doing that. I'm sure that as I wrap up this project this summer, maybe something related, I'm sure something related to COVID may come out with the district if that's what they're interested in. Maybe they just want to move on and not look backwards, and they maybe want to look forwards. I do not know, but I also want to repeat that, as I said in the talk, we just cannot analyze whatever we want with our research partnership. We have to go into a project with the district's buy-in. So like, we have to be interested in it and think we have the capacity to do it. They have to be interested in the topic and see it as beneficial to their students. I have proposed things to the district that they felt would not change their policy practice. So even though I thought it was a great idea, they did not. And we've said the same to the district, that we just don't have the capacity, we're not interested in. We have to come to the table and agree on a topic. So if I said, I want to just look at your, I don't know if they have actually teacher level data like that, but if I want to look at STEM instruction, if they said we're not interested in that, then the project won't happen. So we don't have, even though we have a lot of data on our servers, we just cannot play around with all of it. We have to have a formal proposal with a lot of signatures on both sides, on our side as well as on the district side.
I see. So we have time for one or two more questions. So if you have any questions on your mind or things you'd like to bring up for discussion, please raise your hand. Last chance. I have one other question, which is kind of related to what you just said, and it seems to be something that the school district would probably want to be looking at. Clearly, they were interested in looking at the gender gap. Otherwise, you would not have produced those data that I had on the screen a minute ago. There are many other dimensions, such as ethnicity, and you looked at socioeconomic status with ethnicity, and of course, there's a relationship. Unfortunately, I say of course, I should say unfortunately, there's a relationship between ethnicity and socioeconomic status. So, did you analyze any gaps in other dimensions, and what the impact was of the 12th grade check-in on that for, let's say, Black or Hispanic minorities?
So we did try. There wasn't much going on by other, like looking at whether it disproportionately affected racial ethnic minorities or economically disadvantaged students. I think the primary story was around gender. We did see that there is some work we're doing right now, and it's suggesting that the check-in was helpful to females, but females from low socioeconomic neighborhoods and economically disadvantaged females in particular. So there might be an intersection between gender and poverty status, for instance, but that's kind of work that we're doing right now. But other than that, there wasn't, the story was really about gender.
Yep. So you ended with a slide of next steps. And as I was listening to you explaining your next steps, I was thinking, do you have plans to scale that statewide, given that the policies are statewide, they're not limited to the district you're studying? And to what extent do you think some of your, or maybe what is really crucially important is to publicize the conclusions from your study, to get the word out so that school districts find out what the importance is of guidance counseling and what the relationship is between going to college and having the STEM, what is it? Not certificate, I forgot, endorsement. I lost the word there for a moment. So what do you see as next steps beyond the school district that you studied?
So I don't see us replicating the study statewide. So you have to get access to state data, you have to do it through a different university. And so there's a center at the University of Houston that stores state data. It costs about $20,000 a year to do that. And also, I don't know if it would be sufficient. As I mentioned earlier, a big part of the association between STEM endorsement and college enrollment is SAT scores and GPA. And neither of those are available in the state administrative data. So I think any analysis we would do with state data would be incomplete in my view. Also, I think that the district that we're focused on is a unique case because they have done a little bit to minimize the differences among endorsements. In particular, Algebra 2 is required for high school graduation for all students in this district. In other districts, they do not have that requirement. And so only STEM students would be required to complete Algebra 2. And so in some ways, you may think that this district is almost a best case scenario of minimizing differences in endorsements requirements. So I think it's kind of a unique case. We are going to, for each project at HERC, we've released some research briefs or reports, so we'll do that. They're meant for a practitioner audience so that it doesn't use academic jargon. We also know that people at our district partners do not have time to read a 10-page brief or report. So then we create one page front and back documents with highlights of the findings. There'll be 4 reports and 4 one-page documents. But we also know that some district administrators don't even have time to read the 4 one-pagers. So we'll release another one-pager that's summarizing the findings across all the studies.
Did you see Rob's question in the chat? He's asking, does Texas not have a public set of data that researchers can get access to for free regarding high schools? Isn't there sort of a public high school database, anonymized, of course, that you have that you can have access to?
They release public data. It's basically school report cards. So it's not student level data. So you can't see which students chose the endorsements. That stuff, any student level data in any state is going to be restricted. So either you have to probably apply to some agency at the state level. And that's what we would have to do in the state of Texas.
Thank you.
Even though the data for the state data for Texas is housed at a few public universities, but the board that approved your proposal is a state board.
Okay, good. Thank you.
And actually, it's easier to get access to data in Texas than most other states.
Isa, you get the last question.
It has to do with data again, and I was going to share that at least the public data sets that I don't study student level data in this context, but my colleagues who do, anything that's available is either anonymized, but it's non-student level. Just to illustrate the kind of process, some of us who have experience with research at the undergraduate level and have to go through an IRB, at least at this institution, the IRB process is a walk in the park compared to the kind of process that you have to go to get student anonymized or student level data. Second, there's a, for example, like Dr. Holzman already said, these data sets are housed in specific institutions. So if I had access to this, it's not like I could sit here and just go ahead and analyze the data. I would very much have to go to Harvard or wherever it's housed, get my lock and key and go into the specific room, where is the only place where I can run my analysis. So that's really to the extent that this data is protected. So all of that build up to say, Dr. Holzman, can you say anything else, or can you add anything about partnerships between researchers and educators? Because this data conversation, while very technical, I mean, it further highlights not even the desirability, but like the need of these partnerships with institutions who have access, with educators like people in this network, like us, who have the questions. So you talked about, of course, you have a rich data set, you have a number of models that you could run to conduct analysis that are interesting to academics, but can you say more about the relationships and access and gaining access and the give and take that might happen potentially between the different interests?
So these research practice partnerships emerged in the 90s. The first one was out of the University of Chicago, it's the Chicago Consortium for School Research. And the goals are twofold. One is to change how academics do research, to do research that's more applied, more practical, less theoretical research that can be used by policymakers to make change. And the second goal is to change how districts, practitioners use research. Oftentimes a lot of practitioners do not have a background in research. They do not have time to learn how to become a researcher since they have other responsibilities. And sometimes they make decisions based on personal preferences, or anecdotal experience. And so it's to help districts to make evidence-based decisions. We also know that a lot of districts, even if they have research departments, do not have time to do the kind of research that Rice University would be able to do. For instance, in LUSD, their research department is large, it has a dozen staff, but it's basically focused on school accountability. Every year, they have to produce a number of reports to the state. And so that's kind of what their research department does. They do not have time to do internal evaluations of policies or programs. And so that's where we come in, so we can collaborate with them on those kinds of questions. I didn't mention that most of our work is with higher level people. I think we've had some internal discussions about how to involve, people on the ground, teachers, counselors, other kind of school staff. I would say if you're interested in collaborating with a researcher in your district, or if there's a research practice partnership in your area, I would probably, talk to a department administrator or research department and see if there's a way for you to get involved and have a say, or even propose questions that you and others are interested in. But I'm not aware of other partnerships that do involve teachers and counselors and other kind of staff that have direct interface with students, but there might be some out there that could be used as models.
Thank you.
And thank you, Isa. We're at the top of the hour, and we keep this strictly to 1 hour. So I want to thank you for bringing up this crucially important subject. And for me, the take-home message is that our efforts within the PoLS-T network really should expand to include a discussion with guidance counselors and decision makers. We're about to have in early June an exchange, which is a partially asynchronous, partially synchronous conference. We have 3 major themes. The first one is why physics, in order to provide high school physics teachers the tools to convince skeptical parents and students of the importance of taking physics seriously and including it into their plan of study. The second one is everyone's a physicist, which is very much along the lines of what I think it was Helen said earlier. Everyone is a scientist and everybody is curious about the world, and it doesn't matter what socioeconomic status you're coming from, or which part of the world, or what ethnicity you are. We're wired to be curious about the world. We're wired to want to understand how things around us, both the mechanical universe and societies, work. And the last theme is, best practices. So I'm sure that we'll continue some of that discussion. But thank you so much for both your talk and your very thoughtful remarks here. So my applause, and in the audience, please press your reaction button to endorse Brian to use a word that he used many times for his talk. So before we adjourn, I want to encourage you to register for that conference. It's going to be much less time consuming because it's partially going to be asynchronous, so you can see it whenever you want, than our meeting last year. Also, I hope to use it as an opportunity to grow the network. So go to your school districts or neighboring school districts and try to convince people to sign up. Also, we extended the deadline for submission of short talks. So please do consider contributing your thoughts, and because we all need to work together, and sharing ideas is one of the most important things we can do. And that's why we call this event an exchange. And last but not least, I also want to briefly announce the next PoLS-T talk and live discussion, which will be just 2 weeks from now on June 19th. Again, same time, 11, where we have Eugenia Etkina from Rutgers University, who will be talking on how doing experiments in learning physics experiment. The title of her talk is When Learning Physics Mirrors Doing Physics. So I hope you will all join us for that event. With that, thank you again so much, Brian. I would love at some point to catch up and talk some more, because I think a lot of the work you do has very broad implications, and I think it's important for the betterment of society, and for addressing a lot of inequalities that we have in society, and here in the US in particular. So thank you very much. Everyone, be well. We'll have after Eugenia Etkina, we'll have a break. I realize everybody's totally zoomed out and tired of the pandemic, tired of having your entire life online. So for the months of July and August, we will suspend our talks and meeting, and then in the fall, when we're totally re-energized, we'll start up again. Thank you all for coming. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. See you in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.